Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and it's time for another amazing patron-voted video. This time we've shuffled up the contestants, and Valkyrie won over all the other contestants, but as we'll see later, they might have had a little divine intervention helping them out. Premiering in the August 2018 side set Shadows in Valhalla, Valkyries are a theme piloted by one Siegfried von Schroeder in the anime. Someone whose backstory reads like Seto Kaiba, but 5 minutes late to everything. He's a child prodigy, was put under extreme psychological distress for the sake of others to groom him for the world of business, but at every turn, Kaiba Corp beats Schroeder Corp to the punch, with probably the most outrageous example being that Siegfried was about to present a virtual duel system to Pegasus, thus revolutionizing duel monsters forever, but Kaiba got to the pitch meeting just a little bit sooner, paralleling how Siegfried's father had lost out on a business deal to Gozaburo Kaiba being just a bit faster. So it's no wonder Siegfried developed a hate crush on Kaiba. They're basically the same person, right down to having a geeky younger brother. But the real question is, does Siegfried also have iconic monsters that can stand up to the mighty Blue Eyes White Dragon? Well, the anime was pretty clear about that, but how does it translate to paper? That's something I can help with. We'll take flight with our shield maidens, see just what all the fuss is about, then find some spare time to find some friends. Get ready to ride, cause it's time for Valkyrie Explained. So what's the deal with Valkyries? Well, they're a series of light fairy monsters that focus on team tactics, helping to summon each other out for big pushes of damage, with a small sub-theme of caring about how many monsters your opponent has that are banished, giving you some more attack boosts. But there are a ton of strategies that assemble a ton of monsters to push for game. What makes Valkyries better than a more robust strategy? Well, no use beating around the bush, I'm gonna lead with probably the deck's most iconic and funky card, Mischief of the Time Goddess. It's a quick play spell card that keeps both players from activating cards or effects in response to its activation, and can't be played at Chainlink 2 or higher. It can also only be activated at the end of your battle phase, and if all monsters you control are Valkyrie monsters, minimum 1, you send this card to the grave. Also, immediately after this effect resolves, skip to the start of the battle phase of your next turn. If you do, you can't activate Mischief of the Time Goddess until the end of that turn, keeping you from chaining multiple Mischiefs together to get even more battle phases. But yeah, that's right, this deck is probably the only one that reasonably gets you multiple battle phases, but not in the way that gets you more than one in a particular turn. By using Mischief of the Time Goddess, you skip over any negative lingering effects while resetting any once per turn effects. So if your opponent survives the second onslaught, you could get some pretty sweet value. But the big upside is that you don't necessarily need 8,000 points of damage to OTK your opponent, because now you get a second shot of hitting that threshold. So, suffice it to say, this Mischief is way better than the Gnomes kind. I'm not mad, by the way. Okay, now it's time for the actual monsters. Valkyrie Shesta is a level 1 monster with 0 attack and 2000 defense, and if this card is special summoned, you can special summon a Valkyrie monster from your deck except a copy of this card. And during your main phase, you can send the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck to the grave. So you get this onto the board with 1-for-1 or Valhalla, Hall of the Fallen, and that gets you a whole other monster on top of it. Milling our opponent seems a little strange. It's not like that's a viable win condition outside of Runic, but a bit of a spoiler here, we do get a sneak peek at our opponent's top deck every once in a while, so this can bin any problematic cards you find. And Shesta has a tiny pony, I can't deal with it. Valkyrie Funft is a level 2 monster with 800 attack and 1200 defense, and Valkyrie monsters you control gain 200 attack for each of your opponent's banished monsters. And if you control a Valkyrie monster other than a copy of this card, you can send a Speller Trap card from your deck to the grave. Wow, it really is just foolish burial goods. We have a nice target for it already on theme, but any that have good grave effects are on the table. And you can't forget that bonus either, because it scales pretty well. With only 3 of our opponent's monsters being banished, that's a 600 point boost for all of our on-theme monsters, which can get out of hand pretty quickly. Get that effect charged up enough and you'll be in for a fun time. Valkyrie Chariot is where things get a little odd. It's a level 3 Wind Union monster with 500 attack and 1000 defense, following all the usual Union rules, though only equips 2 fairy monsters. When the equipped monster declares an attack, you can have it gain 500 attack, and this attack gain remains even if this card leaves the field. So it's a permanent boost that gets bigger the more you use it. That's kinda wild, and considering Mischief of the Time Goddess could give us 2 attacks, that means we're looking at a 1000 point boost in one of those big battle phases. So if we can cheat this into play, it'll make for a great companion. But why are we bringing the Chariot into this? We already did the Arcana Force episode. Valkyrie Vierte is a level 3 monster with 1400 attack and defense, and during your main phase, you can excavate the top cards of your deck equal to the number of other Valkyrie monsters you control, and if you do, add an excavated normal spell or trap card to your hand. Also send the remaining cards to the grave. Otherwise, shuffle all excavated cards into the deck. And when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon a Valkyrie monster from your deck. Oh god, this card was printed in 2019 and still has the destroyed by battle trigger. Still, you do have the option of running this into an opponent's monster, and with 1400 attack, that's not an outrageous proposition. The big effect is the Excavate one. While not as generic as Funft, the normal spell and trap pool is littered with helpful options, and I'm sure it's going to feel really good hitting a draw spell off the top. Though, that's going to depend on if you're running a healthy amount of normal spells and traps in your deck. Put too many other card types in there, and you're bound to Virt, of course. Valkyrie Dritta is a level 4 monster with 1000 attack and 1600 defense, and if normal or special summoned, you can add a Valkyrie card from your deck to your hand, except a copy of this card. And Dritta gains 200 attack for each of your opponent's banished monsters. Ooh, looks like someone has a little personal Funft effect as well, which is very helpful since their starting attack stat is meh. But being a Stratos is honestly good enough and can lead to some devastating plays, cause remember, this searches cards, not just monsters. The only sad part is that unlike Stratos, this does have a hard once per turn on it, so instead of getting all your searches done at once, you'll have to be Drit-fed them. Valkyrie Zvite is a level 5 monster with 1600 attack and defense, and if this card is summoned, you can target a monster your opponent controls and destroy it. And after damage calculation, if this card battles, you can target a continuous spell in your grave and add it to your hand. That's great. You just see a monster you don't like? Get rid of it. Throw a sword at it, Zvite doesn't care. And getting back your continuous spells is nice, though it is a little specific. Maybe you can recycle some off-theme cards that have helpful effects, but the main draw is going to be our archetypal continuous spells which have some interesting effects. But since you'll need to either tribute summon this or find a way to cheat it out, I'm not quite sure how effective this will be. Fortune Chariot is another Wind Attribute Union monster, though this time it's level 6, presumably because they added an extra horse. It has 1000 attack and 2000 defense, follows the usual Union rules, and equips to only fairy monsters. And it's also always treated as a Valkyrie card. The equipped monster can attack directly, but when doing so using this effect, the battle damage it inflicts to your opponent is halved. Seems pretty crummy to tack that on, since we went through all the trouble of getting a big Union on board, but hey, I guess all the vehicle bolt gets in the way of your attacks. I honestly prefer the smaller Chariot for its permanent boost and ease of access. Also, don't think I didn't see you trying to sneak in that extra Arcana Force past me. Just because you missed Fortune the first time around doesn't mean you can just act like you were always there. Valkyrie Erst is a level 6 monster with 1600 attack and 1800 defense, and if this card is special summoned from the hand by a spell effect, you can target a Mischief of the Time Goddess in your grave and add it to your hand. And if you control a Valkyrie monster other than a copy of this card as a quick effect, you can banish a monster from your opponent's grave, then this card's attack becomes equal to the banished monster's original attack until the end of this turn. This is very helpful because not only does it shore up Erst's wanting stat line, it also gets more of your opponent's monsters banished, which means more attack boosts for Funft and Dritta. Not to mention the ability to bring back a Mischief of the Time Goddess is super sweet. And trust me, we have our fair share of spell effects that can get Erst onto the board. This is also super helpful because we don't want to be playing a lot of the Time Goddess to help prevent bricking. We won't always be in a position to rush for game, but Funft has our back by throwing it into the grave so we can get it back later. What an erstwhile companion. Valkyrie Brunhilde is a level 7 monster with 1800 attack and 2000 defense, and is unaffected by your opponent's spell effects. It gains 500 attack for each monster your opponent controls, and when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can have this card lose exactly 1000 defense, and if you do, your Valkyrie monsters can't be destroyed by battle this turn. Now, because it only triggers on your opponent attacking, you can't really use this during your battle phase, but I don't really think that's a problem. The issue is that you only get the protection if your opponent goes to battle and actually attacks. If they use removal before that, then you're out of luck. But being immune to spell effects will hopefully go some ways towards keeping that from happening. And its small stat line is mitigated by your opponent, depending on how big their field is. Though I'm more than happy for the help that Funft can give us, so we aren't fully reliant on that. Brunhilde gives us a defensive body to help withstand our opponent's onslaught, while mounting a powerful counter-offensive. And honestly, what more could you ask of a mythic warrior spirit? Valkyrie Erda is a level 8 monster with 2000 attack and 2200 defense, and you can only control a single copy of this card. And while you control an Erda, special summoned by the effect of a Valkyrie card, all face-up monsters your opponent controls lose 1000 attack, and any card destroyed by battle or card effect that would be sent to your opponent's grave is banished instead. So it's not Macrocosmos per se, but if your opponent controlled it and it gets destroyed, that card is not hitting the graveyard. And that's if it's destroyed by anything, including monsters that aren't Erda, monsters that aren't Valkyries, or any kind of destruction removal, coming from either you or your opponent. And this is big for, once again, fueling the banished zone for our attack boosts. But the big takeaway is the attack debuff that Erda brings to the table. 1000 points ain't nothing, and makes even our smaller Valkyries look pretty good. Erda really ties the monster lineup together, even though I hardly know her. Valkyrie Sigrun is a level 9 monster with 2200 attack and 2400 defense, and if this card is in your hand, you can target a face-up spell or trap card you control, send it to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon this card. And if this card is normal or special summoned, you can special summon a level 8 or lower Valkyrie monster from your hand or grave. So for the low cost of a single card, you get Sigrun and any other Valkyrie that's currently in rotation. You can get Erda with their effects online, Ursta to get back Mischief of the Time Goddess, Zvaita for some removal, and recovery if you sent a continuous spell to the grave, and probably the most important, Shesta, because it can then special summon any Valkyrie from your deck. This is a massively powerful play starter, so as long as you have some other Valkyries to go along with the summon, you'll be riding pretty high in the saddle. Alright, that's all the monsters, now it's time for the spells and traps. Final Light is a normal spell card that has you paying life points in multiple of 1000. Then you target a Valkyrie monster in your grave with a different name for every 1000 life points paid. Special summon them, then your opponent can special summon monsters with 2000 or less attack from their grave up to the number of monsters you special summon by this effect. This is an odd one because it's not a Valkyrie card, so it's not going to get Erda's effect online, nor can you search it with Dritta, but can still trigger Sigrun and Shesta's effects, which in turn can get their effects online. The big downside is that while it is basically a soul charge that lets you have your battle phase, your opponent gets to contest you with their own monster. But because their grave is public knowledge, you can kinda guess what they'll want to summon, and what they're even able to summon. In which case you can actually tell if the summon will be worthwhile. Heck, you could use your banishing effects to get 2000 or less attack point monsters out of their graveyard so they don't have a choice. And if they do manage to summon any, make sure you bring Zvite to the party and they'll bump off the one you don't like the most. And if you can get Erda on the field eventually, no monster they can summon is going to do much to stand in your way. Just make sure they don't have access to any potent on-summon effects, because otherwise Final Light might be your final curtain. Valkyrie's Embrace is a normal spell card that you can only activate if all monsters you control are Valkyries. Target an attack position Valkyrie monster you control and a face-up monster your opponent controls, change your monster to defense position, and if you do, banish that opponent's monster. But you're not able to special summon monsters the turn you activate this effect, except Valkyrie monsters, and this checks before and after. This seems pretty low impact, not gonna lie. I think the idea here is that since our Valkyries tend to have low attack and better defense, this helps to offset that by removing a problem monster while putting yours in a more favorable position. Heck, this is even searchable removal with Dritta, which can use it immediately. And by banishing, well, you've heard me talk about the merits of doing that enough already. So it's not without its positives, I just feel like we have more impactful options. Not to mention that restriction is ridiculous, keeping you off any off-theme options. If you expect to fight things with destruction protection or strong grave effects, this is a neat way to answer those. Anything else? Just embrace the Raigeki. Ride of the Valkyries is a normal spell card that special summons any number of Valkyrie monsters with different names from your hand. If you special summon 3 or more monsters with this effect, you take no battle damage until the end of the next turn. During the end phase of the turn you activate this effect, shuffle all monsters you control into the deck. You can also banish this card from your grave to add a Mischief of the Time Goddess from your deck to your hand. This is probably one of our more powerful enablers, dropping a slew of Valkyries right out of your hand and potentially getting more with their own effects. And while on paper it sounds like you'll lose your whole setup, the fact that it also grabs you Mischief of the Time Goddess means that won't be an issue, because if you resolve it, you'll just skip over that unfortunate drawback. And if you're not able to, well, At least if you summon enough, you won't be attacked out of the game with that battle damage protection. With the right combination of cards, this can end the game on the spot, and honestly, it's a shame they won't let you play the iconic song if you manage to pull this off. Tournament organizers, please, let us have a little fun out there. I'm begging you, just a little fun! Pegasus Wing is a normal spell card that you can only activate if you have a Union monster in the grave. Target any number of Valkyrie monsters you control, and those monsters can attack directly this turn, and if they do so using this effect, the battle damage they inflict to your opponent is halved. So this is like the spell version of Fortune Chariot, which I believe assumes you're also playing Fortune Chariot, but now you can just play Valkyrie Chariot, so it's a bit more playable. But the effect is still pretty lackluster. Since the damage has to be halved, you need to effectively make sure you have 8k worth of damage going into the double battle phase, which kind of defeats the purpose of playing this deck. Except it actually has to be more than 8,000 because the direct attacking is only going to be available for the first round of attacks. Honestly, I feel this card is kind of a wash, especially because it's not even searchable by Dritta to use in edge cases, making this card a little Pegasus. It's funny because Among Us. Now it's time for the card some of you might be very familiar with. Goddess Skuld's Oracle is a continuous spell card, and when activated, if all monsters you control are Valkyries, minimum 1, you can add a Goddess Verdon's Guidance from your deck to your hand. And once per turn, during your main phase, you can look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck, and if you do, place them on top of their deck in any order. But you can't normal or special summon monsters for the rest of the turn except fairy monsters. This is the first part of the Goddess cycle of continuous spell cards in Valkyries, and you'll basically get the entire trio right off the bat for activating Skuld. It's also why Zvite recovers you a continuous spell from your grave, and they make for great fodder to summon out Sigrun. And while the effect to look at your opponent's top deck seems odd, it's meant to combine with the other two. And, you know, it's an oracle, knowing the future is kind of their thing. But if you know this card for anything, it's not because it helped your opponent enable a Valkyrie win, but rather to do something a bit more mystic. That's right, community legend Jeff Leonard used this as a spicy tech pick for his Mystic Mind stall deck, using this to always float the worst card to the top of his opponent's deck, while keeping removal like Cosmic Cyclone away from their hand. This ensured he had enough time to resolve either Final Countdown, or burn his opponent out with Cauldron of the Old Man and Wave Motion Cannon. And the summon restriction wasn't even an issue because it was actively bad for him to control monsters with Mystic Mind on the field. It's a surprisingly powerful tool in these niche situations, stifling your opponent's game plan while your passive one keeps on ticking. But you should have seen that coming. After all, you are dealing with one of the most powerful entities on the internet, Norse goddess Hatsune Miku. Goddess Verdon's Guidance is a continuous spell card that, when activated, like Skuld, gets you a new Goddess card from your deck to your hand if all monsters you control are Valkyries, minimum 1. This one being Goddess Erd's Verdict. Once per turn, you can declare a type of card, either monster, spell, or trap, and reveal the top card of your opponent's deck. And if it's the declared card, they set it to their field. Otherwise, they add it to their hand. So you use Skuld to set up your opponent's top deck so you can call it right. But no matter what, your opponent gets the card, so what gives? Well, it's actually tied in very much with the next card, so let's quickly go over Goddess Erd's Verdict, another continuous spell that keeps your opponent from targeting or destroying your Valkyrie monsters with card effects. Once per turn, you can declare a card name, then target a set card your opponent controls. Reveal the set card, and if it was the declared card, banish it. Otherwise, banish a card you control. So the idea is, once you set a card with Verdon, you call it with Erd to get it banished. So in the long run, all 3 of these let you peel a card off the top of your opponent's deck, banishing it, while floating hopefully a bad card to the second position with Skuld, so that ends up being their new top deck. It's a very funny sequence of cards and can contribute to Fump's attack bonus if you banish monsters, but this is a very involved combo for not a lot of payoff, which is wild because you might still want to play it all just to get Erd onto the board to give your Valkyries that very good blanket protection. And besides, who could pass up the opportunity to play Revolutionary Goddess Utena and Sailor Goddess Uranus? Apple of Enlightenment is a normal trap card that targets cards in your opponent's grave up to the number of Valkyrie monsters you control and banish them. If the set card in its owner's control has left the field because of an opponent's card and is now in the grave or banished, you can draw cards equal to the number of Valkyrie monsters you control plus 1. Once again, we have another card that can be used to increase the amount of banished monsters our opponent has, so our buffs get even stronger. But the banish isn't just limited to monsters, so if there are any problem spell or trap cards in there, we can sift them out as well. It also gives us some pretty sweet advantage if our opponent tries to bypass it, but both effects rely on having a healthy board of Valkyries to get any use out of it. It's not a total deal breaker, but on top of not being searchable and being vulnerable to board breakers, I'm just not sure it's worth a spot in our deck. After all, an Apple of Enlightenment a day will keep the victories away. Logi's Flame is a continuous trap card, and while you control a Valkyrie monster, monsters your opponent controls with 2000 or less attack can't attack. And if this card in your possession is destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you can special summon a level 5 or higher Valkyrie monster from your hand or deck. So we're seeing the same 2000 or less attack theme that came from Final Light. Not sure if there's anything about that number that's thematically relevant, but does help keep monsters our opponent revives from it from retaliating. The floating effect is nice, but if they want to get around it, all they have to do is summon a bigger monster, and while Irida can help lower their attack to keep them under that threshold, that's not always a guarantee, making any kind of value you get out of this a slow burn. Alright, so that's all the Valkyrie cards, but what do we do with them? Well, OTKing, or 2TKing if you want to be technical, is the name of the game. We need to get a horde of Valkyries into position, do some mischief, and clean out our opponent's life points before they even know what hit them. The problem is, as a going second deck, we need to contend with all manner of setups, so our additional cards should be focused on breaking boards, as well as assembling our phalanx. So what can we play to help them out? While currently semi-limited at time of recording, it's hard to argue against the versatility of Lightning Storm. Clearing out either the back row or attack position front row is going to be a huge boon, especially if you run Raigeki, Harpy's Feather Duster, or both, as Lightning Storm makes an excellent complement. Part of a winning strategy is assembling our board of Valkyries, which means we need strong one-card combos to make that happen. And like Drytron knows, Diviner of the Herald is a great way to accomplish this. Simply send Trias Hierarchia from deck to grave using Diviner's effect, then tribute that Diviner for the Reborn. You won't get any value out of Trias unless you tribute any other fairies along with it, but you will get to special summon Shesta with Diviner's effect since it was tributed. From there, you can special summon any Valkyrie right out of your deck, and if you have any other ones in hand or in the graveyard you want to bring back, Sigrun is a great option to continue building up your forces. And bonus, that means you now have 2 level 9s to make a cool rank 9 Xyz. Just keep in mind that because you now have a non-Valkyrie on board, you can't use Mischief, so unless you have a way to clear it out, don't expect to go for a big push for game that turn. If we're in the position where we need to stall out, Archlord Christia is a great option. Once we line up the number of Valkyries in our grave, not only do we set up a special summon lock, but also recover one of our Shield Maidens, giving us a strong follow-up next turn while keeping our opponent on the back foot. While Funked does give us a nice attack boost, we don't want to solely rely on it to make up for our lack of attack points, so we'll need to take that into our own hands. Honest works really well in an all-light battle-based deck, but the boost from it will only last for one of those battle phases. Psychic Blade, on the other hand, is a huge boost that won't go away so easily, and at max power, does just clean off half of our opponent's life points. And while you're busy lowering your life points, maybe consider taking in Unstable Evolution. Megamorph is similar, but kind of worse, because it changes the current attack to match either double or half its original attack, which isn't very impactful considering the base stats of our Valkyries. But Unstable Evolution modifies the original attack of the equipped monster, leading to some huge swings in damage, because you'll still be able to benefit from any passive buffs. And speaking of passive buffs, Luminous Spark is unironically very funny here. It actually gives an outrageous amount of attack once we assemble a large board of Valkyries, and that's really all we care about. Defense points be damned. Since we're a bit of a combo deck, we'll need as much gas as possible to get our engine online, so draw spells are a must. Since our extra deck isn't at a premium, Pot of Extravagance can get us some free, easy value, but I'd actually argue for playing Pot of Desires. See, one of the funny quirks of Mischief of the Time Goddess is that it doesn't give you an extra battle phase, it skips over to the battle phase of your next turn, which means all your once per turn restrictions reset. In this case, if you draw an Extrav off of Extrav, you still won't be able to play it because then you'll be in main phase 2 after your battle shenanigans, but that's not quite the case for Desires. Part of the issue with Valkyries is that some of our really good ones are too high level to get out of our hand, so Valhalla, Hall of the Fallen, has some pretty good utility here. Getting a free fairy special summon will help jumpstart our plays, and when we're done with it, we can have Sigrun send it to the grave for its special summon. Court of Justice is also an option if we have Seshta, but it's not recommended. As for a silly tech pick, give Baba Barber is shot. The problem with Mischief of the Time Goddess is that it imposes a pseudo-summon restriction. You can't play anything but Valkyries, or at the very least, have them on board when you want to go for the double battle phase. And that's a bit of an issue if you're looking to toolbox. That's where Baba Barber comes in. Link off any off-theme monster you may have summoned over the course of your turn, and when you go to battle phase, Baba can phase right out, just leaving you with your warrior maidens to do the dirty work and making Mischief an all clear. And that's all I have to say about Valkyries. While this theme is another one saddled with the curse of being an early anime deck, thus leading to gimmicky and unreliable win conditions, it's still arguably one of the most unique decks in the game. Additional battle phases are a design space that, while not necessary at the moment, has been left unexplored for a long time, and it's fun to see how it's being utilized here. After all, it's these funny little themes that allow the designers to test and experiment for more serious implementation down the line, and that's worth its weight in rhyme gold. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Valkyries ready to Val carry you to victory, or are they not destined to head to Valhalla? And which one's your favorite? Personally, I'm a fan of Erda. That color scheme is awesome. Kinda reminds me of Shield Knight, and I'm all about it. Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode was brought to you in part by Dragon Shield. When you want to protect your cards with the power of dragon scales, get some sweet lore for them, and support the channel, check out my link in the description to get started. Today's episode was also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including the illustrious Quasar Commander Green Knight, Nebula Navigator's 3rd Dynasty, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Andrew Newman, A Random Pup, Avi Chali, Kane Senpai, Chibi Gohan, Clockswork, Danny Bound, Eric, Aaron the World Breaker, Frankie, Garland Chaos, Genesis Yu-Gi-Oh!, Gloomba 331, Great Big Pillock, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Howling Zangetsu, Iskander 711, John, Julius Sneezer, Mana Charge, Marluxia Zagirl, Molly Renata, Nathan Vig, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sammy Haim, Sir Knight JCB, Skybuster Leo, Sophie, apparently, The Wizard Moose and Xander Wolfensberger, Cosmic Crusaders Almento 5010, Ariel Kersey, Beluga Masta, Blue Gem, Callum McCann, Chaz Ghost, Corbinisms, Drachenwald, Drake and SpongeBob be like, you used to call me on your shell phone, Eki Bullock, Emony, Eva Padilla, Hike Boyagian, Herbal D, Inblink, Jester Designs, Kale the Dragon, Carp, Kevon Public, King Scarlet Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lemon Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lord Whoop-De-Doo, Manga Pages, Marion James E. Picata, Matt Simmons, Mega Combi, Michael Shimabukuro, Nadia McCarthy, Nitromo, Ruxith Sarani, Shizuka Nijimura, Star-Lord 777, Stephen Williamson, The Legendary Raven, Tucker Ordorn, Venusian Teapot, and Zaldreka, as well as the wonderful Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to be a part of these credits, help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, and participate in the monthly custom card reviews, I would be eternally grateful if you checked out my Patreon in the description or joined up as a YouTube member. And if you'd like to see another video that covers creatures of a Norse persuasion, check out this video I made covering generators. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.